Good morning, and here we are. A quick thoughts on drives for today. Here we are. We're getting towards mid to late April now, and as I walk around, cycle around, or drive around Lincoln, you get to see more because the weather's brighter. And what I've noticed, certainly in the last year, maybe 2 years, is the amount of African people that have come to Lincoln, and that would be Nigerian, possibly Ghanaian. There could be Caribbean as well, but by the eye test tells me they're African, and I've seen a lot, a noticeable amount of Africans in the city of Lincoln. And I imagine there's a high percentage of them that are coming over to study STEM subjects, that are coming over to work in care. And what's interesting is that the people that I see, and the men and the women and the kids sometimes as well, the school kids as well, depending on what time of day you're out, but generally the adults, is that they are very rarely overweight. The African men and women that I see in Lincoln, and I imagine this is the same possibly in Nottingham, Sheffield, Manchester, and of course further down south back in London, but we're just talking Lincoln, this small city that we've got, is that rarely when I see an African, they are overweight. Okay, they're normally lean or muscular. Yeah, these aren't malnourished Africans that we were watching on television in the 70s and 80s, or possibly even 90s. These look like these look like they have, their 3 meals a day, just like we do. I never see African parents with their children, and the parents and the children are grossly overweight or obese, so there's possibly something we could learn here. Now, there'll be genetics. There will be a genetic difference between the English people. I'm talking English blood, not someone who's come to England for a holiday and stayed here. I'm on about an English person, born and bred, at the very least British. Why there are so many unhealthy, overweight looking English men and women and their children. There is so much obesity in Lincoln, and yet the small percentage of Africans that have moved here aren't obese. They're not grossly overweight and carrying weight-bearing injuries and high levels of body fat and visceral fat. I live in Lincoln City, and I see it every single day. This stark contrast between the people of Lincoln that are presumably born here, or at least born in this country, and those that aren't. Now, it got me thinking, yes, we can say there's a genetic difference. However, the Nigerians and the Ghanaians here have got the same access to information and access to food that we have. They could eat the same food that we in England do, yeah, but they choose not to. They eat their own indigenous food, and I've actually been to one of their shops, and some of the food looks nice. I think you've got to learn how to cook it properly, so I would need some advice if anyone out there is of Nigerian or Ghanaian heritage that would like to actually give me a shout and show me how to cook their food properly, because I'd probably enjoy it, so there is a 99.9%, okay, almost 100%, based on the eye test, and then of course the stats, problem with the English diet, with the Western diet as we call it, and you could class Africa as the West as well. I think it's got about 50 countries over on the African continent. I think it's about 50 countries, some of which we've never heard of. Now, there could be countries in Africa where the majority or a large percentage of the people in a particular country on the African continent, where those people are unhealthily overweight. There may be. I'm not saying there isn't, but there is a definite difference between. Now, there are some African women that might be overweight, and that's because they're carrying children. They're pregnant, or they've just finished having their babies. Okay, now that's okay, fair enough. But generally, what I see are a lot of white men and white women in Lincoln who are fat and out of shape and overweight. And yet, someone who's only been in this country 5 minutes or a year or two isn't. Someone who's come from Nigeria or Ghana, yeah, or maybe again the Caribbean or even parts of South America, but these are definitely African. So we could learn something from their culture, their country, yeah. Maybe not the language, maybe not their political or religious standings or followings, but certainly, you know, there is no reason why there should be a mother or father walking through Lincoln High Street buying clothes shopping like they're on television or something, when they are overweight and their kids are overweight and fat and unhealthy. Yeah, there is nothing more creepy looking than a fat obese boy walking around town with his fat obese dad. That to me is neglect. That means the parents, okay, whether they're on their own or co-parenting or on their own, that is neglect from the parent with the child, to watch their child get fatter and fatter every day and become more unhealthy, which leads to musculoskeletal disorders and depression. And yet they could walk past someone from Nigeria or from Ghana on Lincoln High Street who's with their children, and the children aren't obese. Yeah, bearing in mind, these aren't malnourished, starving children that have come over from a war-torn conflict country in the Sub-Sudan or the Sub-Sahara or Somalia or Mogadishu, you know, or Sierra Leone. They have come from a reasonably developed country where they have got access to information, they've got access to highly processed food as well over here, and yet they still don't do it because at this moment in time there's a discussion for it's not in their culture. Okay, one, they've lived in a hot climate for, if let's say the parents are in their 30s or 40s, they've lived in a hot climate for 30 to 40 years, and so it's possible that they either take in less calories because they don't need as much hot food to create thermal heat and energy like we do in the UK, or they're just more disciplined. Yep, and they haven't yet become addicted or obsessed with processed food. And that's not to say they don't eat any, because they might do. They could easily go to you know, a McDonald's or a KFC or a Wendy's or a Domino's just like us. And I imagine possibly in 1 to 2 decades from now, yeah, they might have a change. Okay, but for now, just like when I went to Japan last year and I saw almost zero obesity in Tokyo and Kyoto, I'm seeing almost zero obesity from the Africans that are in Lincoln. So it's actually a problem. It's a clear problem that is in the West, that is in the UK, in England, in Lincoln. Yep. Now, poor health is not something to be proud of and to champion and to blame others for. Yep. Excess calorie consumption, excess alcohol consumption, okay, is not something that we can blame others for. That is down to the individual. Next time you're walking through Lincoln and you walk past an African family, a Nigerian or Ghanaian family with their kids, or on their own, or just the kids, the school kids, take a look. And I would bet 9 times out of 10, you won't see them waddling through town, you know, with, you know, massive, great big faces, great huge bellies, you know, wide hips. You know, we're seeing young men the age of 14, 15, 16 with wide hips, like an old lady, like an overweight old lady. Yeah, we're seeing boys walk through town, you know, clothes shopping and buying mobile phones and buying vaping sticks, you know, and buying, you know, and they're walking through town and they're 3, 4, 5 stone overweight. And then you see the parents and the mother, and she's walking through town and she's 15 or 16 stone. I'm seeing women in Lincoln walk around clothes shopping and buying stuff, just stuff in Lincoln, and they're the weight of a heavyweight boxer. You know, do the math. I'm seeing women walk through town and they're the same weight as a heavyweight boxer. They've eaten their way, okay, they've eaten their way and not exercised their way, okay, to the weight of, you know, Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua in the ring, you know, or one of the big guys on the team in the NBA or in the NFL or in rugby. Women that are eating their way to the same weight as a heavyweight boxer that will be anything between 6'4" and 6'8". It is absolutely absurd what I'm seeing. And yet they're all walking around holding onto a vape, holding onto a mobile phone and scrolling and looking what someone else is doing in Lincoln. What they're not doing is taking any form of accountability for their health or the health of their children. And yet, the people from Nigeria and Ghana that have come to Lincoln aren't like that for now. I'm not saying every single one of them is a thin, live, Olympic athlete, but what they're not is abnormally overweight and obese. And there'll be 101 reasons why, but the one main reason is they take accountability for their health. That's it. That's my thoughts on drives for today. It's just an observation. I didn't invent this. I didn't make this up. What we're seeing is a very, very poor level of physical and mental accountability of people that live in this country. And who's to blame? They are. All right. Thoughts on drives. All right. We could easily take advice. We could take a learning process, from people from other